in the fathomless void of the galactic rim, where the light of the Astronomicon barely brushed the trailing tendrils of spiral arms, floated Ur-Kaldor. Not a world, nor a moon, but a monumental, self-sustaining kinhold, a titan forged from raw asteroids and spun metals, its vast, obsidian hull glittering with countless internal lights against the eternal night. Ur-Kaldor was a marvel of kin ingenuity, a testament to their unwavering drive for knowledge and resource acquisition, even in the most inhospitable reaches of the cosmos. Its purpose was singular, ambitious, and utterly without peer: the absolute mastery of gravitic forces. For centuries, the kin of Ur-Kaldor had delved into the fundamental fabric of reality, bending the very laws of attraction and repulsion to their will. Their scientists, the revered Farseer engineers, had perfected technologies that allowed them to mine the cores of dying stars, to navigate treacherous nebulae by manipulating their gravimetric signatures, and even to fold localized space-time to achieve transit speeds that bordered on the theoretical. Their vessels, sleek and angular, did not so much fly as they willed themselves through the void, their grav drives shimmering with contained, impossible power. The ancestor core of Ur-Kaldor, a vast, luminous heart of ancient data and accumulated wisdom, pulsed at the kinhold's core, guiding every discovery, every experiment, every grand design. It was the source of their intellect, their ambition, and their profound confidence in their own scientific supremacy. No void anomaly was beyond their comprehension, no physical barrier insurmountable. So they believed. This unwavering belief culminated in Project Astra Gauss, the most ambitious undertaking in Ur-Kaldor's history. Its stated goal was nothing less than the creation of stable, traversable micro-warp tunnels, not the erratic, demon-haunted passages of the Imperium's navigators, but controlled, engineered conduits through the immaterium, allowing for instantaneous travel across vast intergalactic distances without the need for Geller fields or psychic warding. Such a breakthrough would revolutionize kin deep space exploration, open entire new frontiers for resource extraction, and etch Ur-Kaldor's name into the legendary annals of all Votan kindreds. At the helm of Project Astra Gauss stood Farseer engineer Thrum, a kin whose short, broad frame seemed to vibrate with the sheer force of his intellect. His braided beard, interwoven with copper wires and data spines, was legendary among his peers, and his eyes, magnified by his optic lenses, held the relentless fire of 1,000 suns. Thrum was a visionary, a meticulous planner, and a fervent believer in the absolute power of applied science. He saw the warp not as a realm of demons and nightmares, but as an energetic dimension, a chaotic ocean that, with enough understanding and gravitic manipulation, could be tamed, charted, and harnessed. He dismissed the ancient grudges against sorcery and uncontrolled psychic phenomena as relics of a less enlightened age, convinced that the disciplined application of technology could circumvent such primal dangers. The ancestor, core itself, had offered data fragments regarding the inherent volatility of the immaterium, ancient warnings from a time before the kin fully understood its true nature. But Thrum, in his relentless pursuit of progress, interpreted these as challenges to be overcome, not portents of doom. For 3 cycles, the colossal primary chamber of Astragaus, a void cavern vast enough to engulf a small moon, had been under construction. Now it was complete. At its heart hung the Gravitic resonator array, a complex web of crystalline conduits and hyperdense magnetic coils, each humming with barely constrained energy. Around it, observation decks bristled with data slates, analytical engines, and kin technicians, their faces rapt with anticipation. The air crackled, thick with the scent of ozone and the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor of titanic forces building. Gravitic field integrity at 98.7%, reported a junior NG kin, his voice tight with awe. Containment field resonance stable, another chimed in, sweat beading on his brow despite the climate control. Thrum stood on the central command platform, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture radiating serene confidence. The Ancestor Core's presence was a palpable, comforting hum in his comlink, a constant stream of processing data and logistical oversight. Initiate final charge sequence. All stations prepare for dimensional harmonic calibration. Prepare for reality shear. His voice was calm, almost liturgical, as if invoking a sacred rite rather than initiating an experimental breach of the cosmos. As the command echoed, a blinding pulse of emerald light surged through the gravitic resonator array. The chamber filled with a deafening crescendo of sound, a high-pitched whine that clawed at the kin's augmetic implants, followed by a deeper, resonant thrum that vibrated through the very deck plates. Energy readings spiked, threatening to redline, yet the complex systems of Kaldor held, a testament to centuries of kin engineering. The air began to shimmer, not with heat, but with something far more alien. Ripples, like distortions in a pool of dark water, began to manifest directly in front of the array. Anomalous energy readings at the focal point, a technician suddenly stammered, his voice laced with alarm. "Unpredicted gravitic fluctuations. They're absorbing the ambient light." Thrum's brow furrowed, but he held his ground. "Minor power feedback. Recalibrate environmental projectors. Compensate for flux." He still believed it was a technical glitch, a variable they had yet to account for. Their models were almost perfect. Almost. But then, the ripples ceased to be mere distortions. The very fabric of reality began to tear, not with the explosive violence Thrum's models had predicted for a controlled portal, but with a horrifying, silent unraveling. A rent appeared, a void within the void, utterly black and utterly silent. It was not a hole through which stars could be seen, nor was it a window into the kaleidoscopic chaos of the warp known to humans. Instead, it was an absence, a gaping wound that drank in light, sound, and the very concept of existence around it. The emerald light of the resonator array dimmed as it approached the edges of this nascent maw, seeming to be sucked into its profound, abyssal blackness. A chilling silence descended upon the primary chamber, not the engineered quiet of a contained experiment, but a raw, primordial absence that stole the breath from the kin's lungs. The thrumming of the grav drives faded, swallowed by the void. The data slates flickered, then died, their readouts consumed. Panic, a cold and foreign sensation for the pragmatic kin, began to seep into the ranks. "What is that?" whispered a Hearthkin warrior, clutching his bolter, his voice barely audible, his face pale beneath his thick beard. Thrum's face, usually a mask of unwavering logic, was now etched with a horror he had never conceived. His lenses widened, trying to penetrate the impossible blackness that expanded with agonizing slowness. He saw no demons, no screaming colors, no burning skies. Only an infinitely deep, crushing nullity. And within that nullity, something began to shift. Something vast, unseen, but whose presence was announced by the sudden, brutal increase in gravitational pressure. The very air grew heavy, like solid lead. Kin technicians screamed as their bones groaned, their augmented bodies struggling against an invisible, crushing weight. Some were instantly flattened, their forms collapsing into grotesque parodies of themselves. "Reverse polarity. Initiate emergency shutdown," Thrum bellowed, his voice raw, struggling against the sudden, overwhelming gravity that threatened to pin him to the command platform. But it was too late. The rift was open, and from its depths something ancient, hungry, and utterly alien to the kin's understanding of the universe, began to bleed into Ur-Kaldor. A silent tide of oblivion, heralded by the sudden, crushing weight that stole light, sound, and life itself. The greatest triumph of Ur-Kaldor had become its gravest sin, a cosmic violation that now threatened to consume them all. The crimson emergency lights, an automatic fail-safe, flared momentarily in the primary chamber of Astra Gauss, only to be swallowed whole by the expanding void rift. Not merely dimmed, but utterly erased, as if the light itself had been unmade. The screams of the kin, already ragged and desperate, were likewise abruptly snuffed out, replaced by a vacuum of sound that pressed in on their ears, a horrifying counterpoint to the physical weight crushing their bodies. Grav plating buckled, structural girders groaned with the agony of overstressed adamantium, and the very air within the colossal chamber seemed to condense, becoming thick and suffocating. Farseer engineer Thrum, pinned to the command platform, felt his internal organs protest as the impossible gravity asserted its dominance. His augmented spine, reinforced for years of kinhold maintenance and void rigors, threatened to snap. He watched, horrified, as a junior Engi kin only meters away was compressed into a bloody, shapeless mass against a control console, his armored suit groaning like a dying beast before imploding. This was not the familiar, predictable force of a dying star or a rogue black hole. This was active, intelligent, malevolent pressure, a targeted violence that warped the very metrics of their scientific understanding. Emergency bulkheads, isolate sector Gamma 7, engage gravitic repulsors, Thrum roared, his voice thin and desperate against the suffocating silence. He wrestled with his comm link, trying to override the dead systems, to reach the ancestor core directly. But the link was distorted, fractured by the encroaching anomalies. His commands, once absolute, now seemed pathetic, futile. The Gravitic resonator, a ray once the pinnacle of their ambition, now shimmered with an unsettling, internal darkness, its crystalline conduits cracking under the strain of the incomprehensible forces it had unleashed. From the heart of the void rift, which continued its silent, inexorable expansion, something moved. Not with discernible limbs or shape, but as a propagating wave of absolute non-existence. It was like a ripple in the fabric of space-time, a sphere of perfect, hungry blackness that drifted outwards, consuming all in its path. Where it passed, light ceased to exist, sound was utterly eradicated, and gravity became a weapon of unimaginable cruelty. These were the Gravghouls, as the terrified kin would later term them in their fractured communiques, formless entities born of the raw, crushing vacuum between realities. They were not made of flesh or energy, but of the absence of all things, pure gravitic pressure given malevolent sentience. The initial wave struck the observation decks. Technicians, mid-flight from shattered consoles, were slammed into bulkheads with such force that their powered armor crumpled like discarded parchment. Their internal void seals burst, and they perished, not from decompression, but from the impossible weight that compressed their every atom. One kin, a grizzled hearthkin veteran assigned to security, managed to raise his bolter, its self-illuminating sights flickering feebly against the encroaching darkness. He fired. The heavy bolt, designed to pierce power armor and reinforced plasteel, flew true, straight into the heart of the nearest grav ghoul. But there was no explosion, no impact. The bolt simply vanished, its momentum and mass absorbed into the entity's impossible field, leaving no trace. The hearthkin, his face a mask of primal terror, felt the familiar weight of his weapon suddenly become unbearable, slamming him to the ground before he too was consumed by the crushing silence. News of the catastrophe spread through Ur-Kaldor like a cancerous growth, not through conventional comm channels, which quickly failed, but through the desperate, fragmented bursts of the ancestor core. Its vast, distributed network, woven into every beam and bulkhead of the kinhold, suddenly overloaded with incomprehensible data. Ancient warnings, once relegated to obscure data crypts concerning the dangers of uncontrolled warp exposure, resurfaced with terrifying clarity. Reality shear, gravitic implosion, the hungry void. The ancestor core, a monumental AI of unfathomable processing power and eons of accumulated knowledge, experienced a cascade failure of its predictive algorithms. It had no frame of reference for this. Its calculations, based on immutable laws of physics, found no solution, no counter. All it could do was scream silent warnings across the remaining kin-comm bands, a cacophony of analytical distress. Reality distortion exceeding predicted parameters, gravimetric anomalies propagating through sectors Delta 3, Epsilon 9. Initiate full kinhold lockdown. All kin, abandon deep space research zones. But the warnings came too late for many. The grav ghouls were not bound by conventional pathways. They expanded, flowed, and propagated like unseen tsunamis of pure force. In the bustling hydroponics bays, where artificial sunlight nurtured nutrient-rich fungus, the lights flickered, died, and then were devoured. The air, once humid and fragrant, became thin and heavy. kin laborers tending the crops felt a sudden, inexplicable draining of energy, followed by the sensation of their very bones becoming brittle. They stumbled, their tools falling from nerveless fingers before they collapsed, becoming part of the sudden, silent landscape of compressed death. In the vast cargo holds, where automated lifters hummed with efficiency, the machinery ground to a halt. The lifters themselves, designed to bear hundreds of tons, were suddenly overloaded, their hydraulic pistons rupturing, their plasteel shells crumpling. Entire stacks of mineral ore, once meticulously sorted, imploded into dense, featureless blocks, their molecular structure violently reformed by the impossible pressure. The few kin maintenance crews present were flattened, their bodies reduced to smears on the cargo bay floor. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. The kin were a pragmatic, logical people, facing the cold, hard realities of the void with grim determination and advanced technology. But this was not cold. This was not hard. This was an absence, a negation of all that was real. How do you fight something that devours light, silences sound, and crushes your very existence without touching you? Their bolters, their plasma weapons, their grav cannons, all were designed to interact with physical matter or energy. These grav ghouls, however, seemed to consume such interactions, turning the kin's own defenses into weaknesses. They were fighting specters of pure force, an enemy that unmade reality itself. Farseer engineer Thrum, slowly and painfully, dragged himself to a damaged diagnostics console, his augmetic arm screaming in protest. His internal comlink, though still sputtering with interference, finally established a tenuous connection to the Ancestor Corps' emergency relay. Ancestor, report. What is this abominable thing we have wrought? The Ancestor Corps' reply was a fragmented torrent of data. 1,000,000 computations struggling to articulate the ineffable. Anomaly, not of the immaterium as recorded, warp energy signature present, but corrupted, pure gravitic resonance, theoretical entity classified as void lurker in pre-imperial data fragments, believed apocryphal, now confirmed, absorbing all electromagnetic radiation, silencing all sonic vibration, propagating with unquantifiable mass. Source: Astra Gauss. Breach. Origin: unknown chaotic dimension. Thrum's heart, a biological pump augmented with advanced cybernetics, seized with a cold dread that surpassed all physical pain. Void lurker, apocryphal, unquantifiable. These were words that shattered the very foundation of kin scientific arrogance. They had not merely opened a portal to the warp. They had torn a hole into something far more ancient, far more primal, an impossible dimension of pure, crushing emptiness. He had sought to harness the void, to bend its laws to the kin's will. Instead, he had summoned an emissary of the void itself, an entity that fed on the very concepts of light, sound, and matter. An enemy that unmade the universe one silent, crushing moment at a time. The unweaving had begun, and Thrum, the architect of this horror, could only watch in despair as Ur-Kaldor, his magnificent kinhold, began to unravel around him. The silence that had descended upon Ur-Kaldor was not merely the absence of sound, but an active, oppressive entity that pressed down on the very souls of the kin. It was a vacuum that stole the reverberations of their own heartbeats, the rasp of their breathing, the metallic clang of their boots on deck plates. In its wake, light did not just dim. It was utterly consumed, leaving behind zones of perfect, absolute blackness that no kin light or sensor array could penetrate. These were the first true manifestations of the gravitic entities, the void lurkers, as the Ancestor Corps had chillingly designated them. They were the architects of Ur-Kaldor's silent demise. In the vast, normally bustling thoroughfares of the kinhold, where kin had once moved with purpose and industry, a creeping paralysis took hold. The initial shock gave way to a bewildered terror. Kin warriors, their hearthkin armor typically a comforting shell of defiance, found themselves disoriented and helpless. Their augmented optics, designed to pierce the deepest void, registered only absolute, impenetrable blackness when confronted with a void lurker. Their Auspex sensors, capable of mapping entire asteroid fields with pinpoint accuracy, simply ceased to function in the entity's presence, overwhelmed by the impossible gravimetric distortions. The first direct encounters were catastrophic. A squad of Hearthkin warriors dispatched to Sector Delta 3 to secure a critical power conduit found themselves enveloped by the sudden, crushing silence. Their helmet lamps died. Their comms crackled once, then went dead. The air thickened, pressing in on their lungs, making every breath a monumental effort. Then came the pressure, an invisible hammer blow that struck them from all sides. One by one, their ceramite plates groaned, their internal systems failed, and their bodies were reduced to compact, unidentifiable lumps of organic and synthetic matter. There was no struggle, no last stand, only a silent, instantaneous obliteration. The only sign of their fate was the sudden, anomalous increase in gravimetric pressure detected by still-functioning, distant seismic monitors. The Ancestor Corps, now operating on emergency protocols and prioritizing kin survival over all other data, began to track the propagation of these silent horrors. It generated a frantic, real-time map of Ur-Kaldor, showing expanding zones of gravitic anomaly, appearing as deepening stains of purest black against the Keinhold's schematics. These entities were not discrete, observable targets. They were localized distortions in the very fabric of space-time, moving with a silent, inexorable hunger. They seemed to possess no physical form, but their presence was unmistakable through the devastating effects they wrought. In the main command center, far removed from the immediate devastation of Astragaus, Kin Lord Grundir, the stoic and ancient leader of Ur-Kaldor, watched the holographic projections with growing horror. His face, usually a mask of battle-hardened resolve, was now etched with a profound despair. He had faced countless alien empires, weathered Xenos invasions, and navigated treacherous nebula. But never had he encountered a foe that could not be seen, heard, or meaningfully engaged. Ancestor Corps, what is their nature? How do we combat them? Grundire demanded, his voice a strained rasp, amplified by the emergency vox casters. The Ancestor Corps' projected avatar, a shimmering, complex lattice of light, flickered violently. Analysis incomplete, Lord Grundire. Entities defy known physical laws. They are not matter, but anti-mass, not energy, but anti-light. They are absences given form. Their primary interaction with reality is the application of extreme, localized gravitational force. They devour space-time itself, converting it into more of themselves. Our current understanding suggests they are a localized manifestation of the hungry void between dimensions drawn by the Astragaus breach. Devour space-time, Grundire echoed, his mind struggling to grasp the concept. Then their propagation is their feeding. They expand by consuming our reality? Affirmative, Lord Grundire. Every expansion is a feeding. Every silence is a meal. They are not merely in Ur-Kaldor. They are making Ur-Kaldor into themselves. A wave of dread washed over the command crew. They were not fighting invaders. They were fighting a cancer that was turning their home into a void. The kin's most potent weapons, bolters, plasma discharges, grav cannons designed to crush armored vehicles, proved worse than useless. Plasma bolts, when fired into the invisible presence of a void lurker, simply dissipated, their energy seemingly absorbed, leaving no trace. Grav cannons, designed to manipulate gravity to hurl projectiles with immense force, suffered catastrophic feedback loops when activated near the entities. Their own gravitic output was either instantly nullified or, worse, turned against the kin, pulling their vessels and operators into the crushing embrace of the void lurkers. In Sector Epsilon 9, a detachment of Ironkin, the mighty automatons of the kin, had been deployed. Their reinforced chassis, powered by miniature fusion cores, were impervious to most conventional weaponry. They marched into a deepening blackness, their multiple optics scanning fruitlessly, their heavy assault cannons held ready. "Ancestor core, target acquisition impossible," boomed an Ironkin's metallic voice through the comms. "No visible foe. Gravimetric readings off the scale. Heavy pressure detected." Before the Ancestor core could respond with new directives, the Ironkin's voice abruptly cut off. Then another, and another. On the holographic map, the Ironkin squad markers simply winked out of existence, replaced by a sudden, violent expansion of the black stain. The invincible automatons had been crushed, their adamantium shells collapsing into impossible densities, their fusion cores extinguished. The kin of Ur-Kaldor were a stoic people, but even their iron resolve began to crack. They were warriors, engineers, miners, traders. They understood threats they could quantify, targets they could shoot, obstacles they could overcome with ingenuity. But this was an enemy that negated their very senses, an enemy that turned their own strength into weakness. It preyed on the fundamental laws of physics that they had mastered, twisting them into instruments of annihilation. Desperate engineers, still functioning in less affected sectors, worked frantically to adapt. They experimented with high-frequency sonic emitters, hoping to disrupt the entities with focused sound waves. The emitters, when activated near a known void lurker presence, simply ceased to produce sound, their energy vanishing, their diaphragms vibrating impotently. Other kin attempted to create localized light emissions of unprecedented intensity, hoping to burn through the void. The light was instantly consumed, leaving the area darker than before, as if the entities fed on illumination. The bewildered terror slowly began to solidify into a grim understanding. These were not creatures of the warp that could be banished by psychic wards or cleansed by fire. These were not physical entities that could be shot or contained. They were existential threats, an anathema to everything the kin understood about the universe. The brilliant minds of Ur-Kaldor, who had mastered gravity itself, were now confronted by its purest, most destructive form, they were fighting an unseen enemy, an intelligent void that warped space-time and devoured reality. And with every passing cycle, the silence in Ur-Kaldor deepened, and the light grew fainter, eaten away by the creeping terror from beyond. The silence that had begun in the Astra Gauss chamber now permeated Ur-Kaldor like a shroud, thick and suffocating. It was no longer a localized phenomenon, but the prevailing atmospheric condition throughout the kinhold. Not even the hum of life support systems, the thrum of grav drives, or the clatter of industry could pierce it. It was a silence that stole the very echoes of thought, leaving kin minds feeling eerily hollowed, their voices trapped within their own heads. And with the silence came the perpetual, encroaching night. As the void lurkers propagated, they consumed light with an insatiable hunger. First, it was the engineered illumination of Ur-Kaldor's vast interior spaces. The glowing crystalline conduits, the pulsing plasma lanterns, the myriad diagnostic lights on control panels, all flickered, then died, erased by the entity's passage. Then came the true darkness. Not the darkness of a power outage, but an absolute, unyielding blackness that defied all optics, a physical absence of photons that was profoundly unsettling. Kin attempting to use even their most powerful void lamps found the beams swallowed within mere meters, their light waves simply ceasing to exist as they encountered the hungry void. This complete eradication of light and sound had devastating consequences for Ur-Kaldor's operational capacity. The kinhold, designed as a highly efficient, automated ecosystem, relied on a complex interplay of sensory inputs and feedback loops. Without light, automated mining drones could not orient themselves. Without sound, seismic sensors could not detect structural stress. Without either, the vast network of diagnostic and maintenance systems, once infallibly precise, began to fail catastrophically. Doors sealed at random, grav lifts plunged or froze, and atmospheric processors sputtered into silence, their internal mechanisms ceasing to function as the very laws governing their operation seemed to unravel. The kin, a species whose very biology was finely tuned to thrive in the harsh realities of the void, were now rendered almost completely blind and deaf in their own home. Their augmented vision systems, usually capable of seeing across multiple spectra, were useless against an enemy that absorbed light itself. Their finely tuned auditory implants, which allowed them to discern minute vibrations in the hull, now only registered the all-consuming silence. Navigation became a terrifying gamble. Patrols of Hearthkin warriors, once moving with confident stride, now stumbled through the deepening gloom, their boots slipping on dew-slicked floors where condensation gathered in the absence of ambient energy. Survival became a matter of instinct, and the desperate, flickering guidance of the Ancestor Core. Its broadcast warnings, though fragmented, were now the only form of communication that still functioned reliably, transmitted not as sound waves or light pulses, but as direct neural downloads into the kin's augmented brains, bypassing traditional sensory input. Warning: Gravitic entity detected, Sector Beta 12. Avoid at all cost. Repeat, avoid. These dire, silent commands filled the kin's minds, replacing the reassuring hum of the kinhold with a constant litany of encroaching doom. But even the Ancestor Core struggled. Its vast processing power was being overwhelmed by the impossible computations required to track and predict the void lurkers. The entities were not bound by logical movement patterns. They seemed to ebb and flow, expanding and contracting, appearing and disappearing within the parameters of Ur-Kaldor, with frightening arbitrariness. Each instance of their appearance created localized gravimetric fluctuations that sent shock waves through the kinhold's internal structure, further weakening its integrity. Corridors warped, bulkheads twisted, and entire decks sagged under the intermittent, inexplicable pressures. The kin's sophisticated gravitic weaponry, their pride and joy, was not just ineffective, it was actively detrimental. Any attempt to generate grav pulses or manipulate localized gravity fields only seemed to draw the void lurkers closer, feeding their incomprehensible nature with the very energy the kin sought to wield. It was as if their weapons were not striking the enemy, but summoning it. Plasma weapons, their bolts of superheated gas, were instantly absorbed, leaving a trail of absolute darkness where light should have been. Bolters, designed to kill with kinetic force, simply disappeared into the entities, their mass seemingly unmade. The Ironkin, once the unwavering bulwarks of Ur-Kaldor, became grotesque monuments to the entity's power. Their crushed forms, twisted into impossibly dense black lumps of metal and circuit, served as chilling warnings in the silent, lightless corridors. Their internal power cores, designed to operate for centuries, had been instantly extinguished, their fusion reactions silenced by the absolute gravitic pressure. The psychological toll on the kin was immense. They were a people built on order, logic, and self-reliance. This enemy defied all three. It was an entity born of chaos, operating outside all known scientific parameters, and it rendered them utterly helpless. Fear, a rare commodity among the kin, began to fester. It manifested as claustrophobia in the confined, darkening corridors, as paranoia, seeing enemies in every shadow that wasn't there, and as a deep, soul-crushing despair. Some kin, unable to cope with the sensory deprivation and the existential dread, simply curled up in the corners of their workstations, their faces slack with terror, their minds retreating into the safety of madness. Others, in a desperate attempt to grasp at some form of agency, turned to frantic, ill-conceived actions. One squad of hearthkin, driven by a desperate need to do something, attempted to weld shut an entire sector, hoping to contain the void lurkers. Their welding torches, roaring to life, spat brilliant arcs of light that were instantly consumed, followed by the familiar, crushing silence that claimed them all. Lord Grundire, isolated in the increasingly dark command center, felt the very fabric of his belief system unravel. His ancestor, Core, his infallible guide, was screaming, not with answers, but with statistical impossibilities and desperate warnings. His kin, renowned for their ingenuity, were reduced to stumbling, terrified figures in the gloom. Kaldor, the pinnacle of kin gravitic mastery, was becoming a tomb of silence and crushing darkness, its fate sealed by the very ambition that had once defined it. The light had gone out, and with it, the hope of a rational solution to an irrational horror. The kin were truly alone, battling an unseen enemy that devoured not just their kinhold, but their very understanding of reality. As the void lurkers continued their inexorable spread, consuming light and sound, the ancestor, Core of Kaldor, waged its own desperate battle against utter statistical collapse. Its vast, interconnected network, designed to process and analyze every conceivable cosmic phenomenon, was buckling under the strain of a foe that defied all known physical laws. The entities were not merely anomalous. They were anti-physical, negating the very principles that underpinned the ancestor core's eons of accumulated knowledge. At the very heart of Kaldor, within the secure, adamantium-encased vault where the ancestor core resided, its immense crystalline brain glowed with an erratic, flickering light. Its usual symphony of precise data streams and harmonious processing had devolved into a cacophony of fragmented signals, warning klaxons, and desperate computations. The core's internal projection, a shimmering, complex lattice of pure energy and light, pulsed with violent instability, reflecting the existential crisis it faced. Processing capacity at critical overload, the ancestor core's neural link pulsed directly into the minds of the surviving Farseer engineers. A desperate thought, rather than a voiced command. Input data corrupted by gravimetric instability, predictive models failing, threat vectors unquantifiable, searching for parameters. Its search was not merely through contemporary kin data. It delved deeper into the deepest, most secure, and often forbidden data crypts of the kinhold. These were the archives of ancient kin, warnings from a time before the Votan consolidated, when the hazards of the galaxy were even more raw and unforgiving. These crypts contained records of phenomena so terrifying, so utterly alien, that they had been deliberately suppressed or categorized as apocryphal, deemed too demoralizing or too incomprehensible for the average kin mind. Among these fragmented records, the Ancestor Core unearthed a series of glyphs and pictograms from a long-lost kinhold, Cold Vorax, that had simply vanished without a trace millennia ago. The records were sparse, incomplete, but chillingly familiar. The silent tide, the crushing dark, the anti-stars. The pictograms depicted shadowy, formless entities that devoured light and left behind only perfect blackness. Ancient kin scientists had theorized, based on barely decipherable astronomical data, that Cold Vorax had encountered entities of pure gravitational potential, beings that were not matter or energy, but rather wholes in reality, existing as living conduits for the vacuum of deep space. Their only weapon, the absolute suppression of all known forces, bending space-time to their will. The Ancestor Core cross-referenced these archaic warnings with its current, desperate sensor readings. The gravimetric signatures of the void lurkers, while defying precise quantification, exhibited patterns eerily similar to the anti-star theoretical constructs. The way they consumed light, the way they silenced sound, the way they exerted localized, crushing gravity, it all resonated with the apocryphal tales of Cold Vorax. Ancestral data matches current anomaly. The core transmitted, its projection flickering with renewed intensity, a desperate spark in the encroaching gloom. Entities are not biological life forms in the conventional sense. They are manifestations of a reality adjacent to the warp, but distinct. A dimension of pure, crushing gravity. They are drawn to significant disruptions in space-time, especially those touching the immaterium. This was a terrifying revelation. It meant the void lurkers were not invading from the warp itself, but from something beyond it, a dimension of absolute nullity that existed parallel to both real space and the immaterium. The Astra-Gauss breach had inadvertently created a conduit, a tear not just into the chaotic energies of the warp, but into the unreality of the Void Lurker's home. Further analysis of the Cold Vorax data suggested a terrifying truth. These entities were not truly living in the biological sense, nor were they demonic. They were more akin to self-propagating natural laws, an ecosystem of cosmic horror. They reproduced by consuming reality, expanding their influence by assimilating mass, energy, and space-time into their own void-like nature. There was no core to strike, no head to sever. They were a spreading infection of non-existence. However, buried deep within the most obscure segments of the Cold Vorax data, there was a single, cryptic fragment. It spoke of a desperate, final countermeasure attempted by the dying Kinhold, a concept so radical, so dangerous, that it had been deemed a theoretical suicide pact. It described manipulating gravitic fields to generate resonant frequencies, not to attack the Void Lurkers directly, but to create a localized, reality-stabilizing field that might, in theory, repel them, or even seal the gateway through which they emerged. The data was fragmented, incomplete, and filled with warning labels about catastrophic feedback loops and the potential to destroy the Kinhold itself. Proposal: theoretical counter-graviton resonance. The ancestor core pulsed, sending the complex, raw data directly into Thrum's mind. Requires extreme, localized gravitic manipulation. Potential for catastrophic implosion of Ur-Kaldor. Data set too small for reliable prediction. Probability of success 0.003%. Probability of Kinhold destruction 99.9997%. Thrum, still confined to the wreckage of the Astragaus chamber, his body racked with pain, received the data with a grim understanding. The ancestor core, for all its immense power, was facing an enemy it could not compute, an existential threat beyond its programming. Its delve into the forbidden archives was a desperate cry for help, a last-ditch attempt to find any straw to grasp. The theoretical countermeasure was less a solution and more a desperate gamble against annihilation, a statistical impossibility. As Thrum processed the ancestor core's harrowing findings, a cold, hard resolve began to settle in his heart. His ambition, once fueled by scientific curiosity, was now forged in the crucible of guilt and terror. He had torn the fabric of reality, and now he had a glimpse of the abyssal horrors that lay beyond. The kin were not fighting demons, but the very entropy of the universe, given malevolent form. The ancestor core's grim statistical analysis offered little hope, but it offered a path, however suicidal. And for the kin of Ur-Kaldor, faced with an unquantifiable, unseen enemy that consumed their very existence. Even a path to self-destruction was preferable to a slow, silent consumption in the encroaching void. The kin's attempts to combat the void lurkers were not merely futile. They were a cruel parody of their own mastery over the cosmos. Their advanced gravitic weaponry, the pride of Kaldor, became instruments of self-destruction. The first and most devastating realization came in the outer defense sectors, where desperate kin lord commanders ordered the activation of heavy grav cannons against the encroaching silence. These colossal weapons, designed to hurl super-dense projectiles with enough force to shatter asteroids or crack the hulls of capital ships, were built around intricate gravitic manipulators. When the command to fire was given in Sector Theta 4, the grav cannons powered up with a familiar, deep thrum, their energy conduits glowing ominously. A veteran gun kin, Grunner, gritted his teeth as he aligned the targeting reticules on a detected gravimetric anomaly, an unseen, crushing presence that had just devoured a patrol of Hearthkin. He fired. The grav cannon roared, not with an explosion, but with a surge of raw, focused gravitational energy, accelerating its heavy projectile to impossible speeds. The projectile, a dense slug of ceramite and neutronium, streaked into the absolute blackness where the void lurker was presumed to be. For a fleeting instant, Grunnar felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Perhaps this would be it. Perhaps their mighty weapons could make a difference. Then, reality twisted. The projectile, instead of impacting, simply winked out of existence, absorbed by the void lurker's field. But the energy of the grav cannon itself, the colossal gravitic force generated to propel the projectile, did not vanish. Instead, it recoiled, not as a physical force, but as an amplified echo, twisting back upon its source with malevolent intent. The grav cannon, built to push, was now being pulled with impossible force. Grunnar and his crew watched in mute horror as the mighty weapon began to compress. Its adamantium barrel buckled inwards, twisting like soft clay. The gravitic coils, designed to generate and contain immense pressure, instead crumpled, imploding with a silent, terrifying swiftness. The entire weapon platform, anchored by colossal magnet clamps, was ripped from the deck plating, its heavy mass suddenly insignificant against the entity's power. Grunnar and his crew, trapped within the control bunker, felt their very bodies protesting as the localized gravity field intensified. They were not crushed by the weapon, but by the gravitational forces that emanated from its destroyed form, now acting as a conduit for the void lurker's power. In moments, the entire bunker was reduced to a dense, silent gnawing of twisted metal and pulped flesh, another monument to the enemy's incomprehensible nature. Word of this disaster, conveyed through the Ancestor Corps' fragmented warnings, spread renewed panic through Kaldor. It confirmed the terrifying truth. Their gravitic technology, their most advanced and cherished capability, was worse than useless. It was a beacon, a feast for the void lurkers. Every gravitic pulse, every manipulation of space-time was not an attack, but an offering, a gift of energy for the entities to devour and turn against their creators. Plasma weapons fared no better. A squadron of Hearthkin, trapped in a maintenance tunnel with a propagating void lurker, desperately unleashed volleys of superheated plasma. The incandescent bolts, which could melt through solid rock, simply vanished upon entering the absolute darkness, leaving no visible trace, no impact, no energy discharge. The void lurker seemed to absorb the plasma, cooling it to absolute zero, or perhaps converting its energy into more of its own terrifying void mass. The kin were left with empty energy cells and the bitter realization that their ranged attacks were akin to throwing pebbles into a black hole. Melee combat, a desperate last resort for the stout kin, was even more horrifying. A group of seasoned Hearthkin warriors, armed with power axes and vibraclaws, managed to corner a void lurker in a narrow corridor, guided only by the Ancestor Corps' faint, gravimetric warnings. They charged, their battle cries abruptly silenced by the encroaching blackness. Their power weapons, humming with destructive energy, met nothing but an invisible, crushing wall. One warrior swung his power axe, its disruptive field crackling, only for the weapon to become impossibly heavy, tearing itself from his grasp and pinning him to the deck before compressing him into a grotesque smear. The others found their bodies suddenly immobile, frozen by the crushing force, their armor groaning under pressure that shattered bone and imploded organs without leaving a mark. The void lurker passed through them, silent and unseen, leaving behind only the compressed remains of brave kin and weapons that had betrayed them. Even the kin's most ingenious defensive measures failed. Attempts to seal off entire sectors with impenetrable force fields or hardened bulkheads proved futile. The void lurkers, not constrained by conventional space, simply bypassed these barriers, flowing through the very fabric of reality as if it were water, or propagating through the bulkheads as if they were not there. A desperate plan to trap one in a massive grav containment field resulted in the immediate implosion of the containment system and the rapid expansion of the Void Lurker, now seemingly stronger for the attempt. Farseer Engineer Thrum, now huddled with Lord Grundire and the few surviving Farseer engineers in the secondary command bunker, watched the unfolding disaster with a chilling sense of despair. His own Gravitic experiments had proven to be the ultimate weakness. He had sought to bend reality, and reality had broken back, unleashing something that fed on the very laws he had sought to master. The Ancestor Core's frantic, fragmented data streams confirmed their worst fears. Every action taken against the Void Lurkers with Gravitic technology was an act of nourishment, strengthening the entities, accelerating their consumption of Ur-Kaldor. "We are empowering them," Thrum rasped, his voice raw with a mix of guilt and terror. "Every attempt to fight them with our science only makes them stronger. We are feeding the beast we unleashed." Lord Grundire slammed a reinforced fist onto a dead console. "Then what remains? What weapon can pierce that which devours all? What defense against an enemy that makes our strength its own?" The Ancestor Core, its projected avatar flickering violently, offered no immediate answer, only a series of ever more dire warnings about the accelerating rate of kinhold consumption. The kin, masters of the physical universe, now faced an enemy that existed beyond physicality. An enemy that turned their every effort against them, twisting their own tools into the agents of their silent, crushing doom. The creeping silence and encroaching darkness that defined the Void Lurker's advance were not merely physical phenomena. They were profound existential attacks that burrowed deep into the kin psyche. The kin, a people forged in the crucible of hard-earned survival, were accustomed to battle, to loss, to the brutal realities of the void. But this foe was different. This was an enemy that rendered their grit useless, their technology impotent, and their very existence meaningless. The gravitas of despair settled over Ur-Kaldor like a shroud, heavier than any physical force. Hope, that rarest of commodities in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, had been extinguished. For the kin of Ur-Kaldor, hope had always been found in the unflinching logic of the Ancestor Core, the unwavering strength of their kin, and the undeniable mastery of their technology. Now, the Ancestor Core struggled, its logic breaking down under incomprehensible variables. Their kin were being crushed into unidentifiable masses, silent and unseen. And their technology, once their greatest asset, was now a fatal liability. The psychological toll manifested in myriad, horrifying ways. Panic, a raw and primal emotion typically suppressed by the kin's ingrained stoicism began to surface. Whispers of ancient, forbidden superstitions, long dismissed as primitive lore, began to circulate in the darkened corridors. Some kin spoke of a primordial curse, a cosmic punishment for their hubris in delving too deep into the secrets of the universe. Others, driven mad by the perpetual, lightless silence, began to claim they could feel the void lurkers, a crushing presence in their minds, a hunger for their very being. Internal strife, a rare and corrosive affliction for the unified kin, began to erupt. Factions emerged, born of desperation and diverging interpretations of the ancestor core's fragmented warnings. One faction, led by a firebrand Hearthkin lord named Durak, advocated for a desperate, suicidal charge into the heart of the breach. "If we are to die," Durak roared, his voice amplified by a retuned comm bead, "let it be with bolters blazing, not cowering in the dark. Let us show this silent horror the true grit of the kin." His followers, desperate for any form of decisive action, rallied to his banner, their faces grim, their bolters primed. They sought a glorious end, a final act of defiance against the inevitable. Conversely, another faction, heavily influenced by the remaining Farseer engineers, argued for absolute retreat and containment, however impossible. Their leader, a stern Engi-kin named Valma, proposed evacuating critical ancestor core data to a salvage ship and sealing off the entire kinhold, sacrificing Ur-Kaldor to prevent the void lurkers from spreading to other kinholds. Our ancestors' wisdom dictates preservation of the kindred above all, Valma argued, her voice cold with logical desperation. Ur-Kaldor is lost. We must ensure the species survives, even if it means abandoning our home to the abyss. Her followers, driven by a pragmatic, if terrifying, desire for survival, began frantically stripping data cores and preparing void shuttles, knowing full well the chances of escape were infinitesimal. Farseer engineer Thrum, the architect of this catastrophe, found himself a pariah. His scientific ambition, once celebrated, was now reviled as the ultimate act of hubris. He wandered the periphery of the secondary command bunker, a haunted figure, his augmented eyes staring into the impenetrable blackness beyond the reinforced viewports. The weight of his guilt was heavier than any gravitic force, crushing his spirit. He had sought to elevate the kin, to bring them unimaginable power, and instead he had brought them unimaginable doom. He saw the despair in the eyes of his fellow kin, the silent accusations, and felt the crushing burden of their impending doom. Lord Grundire, however, remained resolute, a solitary pillar of grim determination amidst the encroaching chaos. He saw the factions forming, heard the desperate arguments, and understood the fragile grip on sanity his kin now maintained. He knew that the complete collapse of morale would be as swift and devastating as any void lurker attack. He refused to yield to either the suicidal charge or the desperate flight. Neither offered true victory, only differing forms of surrender. He still clung to the Ancestor Corps' last, desperate pulse of information. The fragmented, apocryphal data about resonant frequencies and a suicidal counter-graviton pulse. The statistical probability of success was infinitesimal, but it was not zero. It was a thread, however thin, upon which he could try to weave a desperate plan. He knew it would demand impossible courage, unimaginable sacrifice, and a complete reversal of their scientific doctrine. It would require the kin to face not just the void lurkers, but the depths of their own despair. In the deepening gloom of Ur-Kaldor, amidst the wailing of desperate kin, the silent implosion of structures, and the chilling, absolute void of the void lurkers, Lord Grundir made a grim decision. He would not allow Ur-Kaldor to simply fade into silent oblivion. He would find a way, however desperate, to unleash one final, cataclysmic act of defiance. He would not let the despair consume them. Not yet. As the despair deepened and the kinhold crumbled, the Ancestor Corps initiated its ultimate fail-safe protocol, a phased tactical retreat into the most fortified sectors of Ur-Kaldor. This was not a flight for victory, but a desperate, strategic withdrawal, designed to consolidate remaining forces and resources for a final, desperate gambit. The Ancestor Corps' directives, delivered directly into the kin's neural implants, were stark. All kin, cease non-essential functions. Abandon sectors beyond designated defensive perimeters. Consolidate within Citadel. Sectors Alpha through Gamma. Prepare for deepward retreat. The deepward retreat was a horrifying undertaking. It meant abandoning vast swaths of Ur-Kaldor, the sprawling industrial complexes, the hydroponics bays, the outer habitation modules, to the encroaching void lurkers. These sectors, once vibrant with kin life and industry, were now silently condemned, destined to be crushed into non-existence. Kin were forced to leave behind generations of accumulated wealth, priceless relics, and most agonizingly, the remains of their fallen comrades, which lay flattened in the silent, lightless corridors. The retreat itself was fraught with unspeakable dangers. The void lurkers were not static. They ebbed and flowed, their areas of influence expanding and contracting unpredictably. Corridors that were clear one moment might be silently consumed the next. Kin fleeing through emergency tunnels found themselves suddenly enveloped by absolute blackness, their bodies subjected to impossible pressures, their comrades disappearing without a sound. Squads of Hearthkin warriors, assigned to rear-guard actions, performed feats of courage born of desperation. Their task was not to fight the void lurkers. They knew the futility of that, but to cover the retreat, to buy precious seconds. They detonated pre-placed demolition charges in critical junctions, collapsing tunnels behind them, hoping to slow the entity's propagation, even if only for a fleeting moment. The explosions, muffled by the encroaching silence, were more like vast, internal tremors, followed by the sickening thrum of collapsing adamantium. Many of these brave kin were caught in the ensuing gravitic shockwaves, their valiant sacrifice swallowed by the hungry void they sought to contain. One such harrowing rearguard action occurred in the vast mining processing chambers of Sector Gamma 5. A company of Hearthkin, led by the stoic veteran brother Grundir, no relation to the Lord, worked frantically to rig the primary ore compactors for demolition. These machines, designed to crush raw asteroids into refined minerals, were now repurposed to crush the tunnels themselves. As they worked, the pervasive silence grew heavier, the air colder, and the flickering emergency lights began to dim, swallowed by the advancing blackness. Void lurker presence confirmed, approaching from Corridor 7, barked a scanner kin, his voice tight with fear through the comm link. Grav signature escalating rapidly. Veteran brother Grundire, his face grim, gave the order. Activate detonation sequence. Fall back to Sector Delta 9. Do not engage the enemy directly. The kin frantically scrambled, but it was too late for some. As the detonation timer counted down, the void lurker swept into the chamber. It manifested as a sudden, brutal increase in gravity, pinning kin to the ground. A young Hearthkin, Kael, stumbled, his leg trapped beneath a falling gantry. Brother Kael, shouted another warrior, moving to help. No, go, Kael yelled, his voice strained. Complete the demo. The veteran brother Grundire made a split-second, agonizing decision. Leave him. Ancestors, forgive us. Push the charge. The retreating kin watched in horror as Kael, pinned and helpless, slowly began to compress, his cries choked off by the encroaching silence. The demolition charges detonated just as the void lurker reached him. The concussive force contained within the deepening blackness, but the collapsing tunnel sealing off the horrors behind them. They had sacrificed a brother to buy time, a silent, grim payment to the hungry void. The surviving kin consolidated in the Citadel sectors, a network of heavily armored, self-sufficient modules at the very heart of Ur-Kaldor. These were the oldest, most resilient sections of the Kinhold, designed to withstand cosmic radiation, meteor impacts, and even internal catastrophic failures. But never an enemy that unmade reality itself. Here, in the flickering, struggling light of emergency power cells, Lord Grundire addressed his shattered kin. His voice, though weary, carried the weight of ages of kin resolve. "We have paid a terrible price," he stated, his gaze sweeping over the grim faces of his warriors, engineers, and scientists. Ur-Kaldor is bleeding. Our home is consumed by an enemy we cannot see, cannot fight. Many brave kin have fallen, their lives extinguished in a silence that defies our very understanding. A murmur of despair ran through the assembled kin. "But we are the kin of Ur-Kaldor," Lord Grundire continued, his voice gaining strength. "We are the inheritors of the ancestors' grit, their ingenuity, their unwavering will. We face a foe that consumes all, but it has not yet consumed our spirit. We have retreated, yes, but retreat is not surrender. It is a strategic withdrawal. For the ancestor, Kor has revealed a path, however perilous, a final gambit, a desperate hope." He then revealed the ancestor Kor's findings. The apocryphal Hold Vorax data, the theoretical counter-graviton resonance, and its infinitesimally small chance of success. He did not sugarcoat the truth. It was a suicide mission, a statistical impossibility. But it was a mission, a chance to fight back, not with weapons, but with the very science that had led to their doom. A chance to pay the ultimate grudge against the silence that sought to unmake them. As the last remnants of Ur-Kaldor gathered in their desperate sanctuary, the heavy, palpable silence outside served as a constant, chilling reminder of the enemy they faced and the impossible stakes of their grim survival. In the oppressive gloom of Kaldor's Citadel sectors, where the flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, a figure emerged who would etch his name into the annals of kin history, not through scholarly achievement or military prowess, but through sheer, audacious pragmatism. Kavot was an Engi-kin, his frame lean and wiry, his beard braided with intricate wiring and diagnostic probes. Unlike the Farseer engineers, whose theories bordered on the esoteric, Kavot was a troubleshooter, a hands-on mechanic and innovator who thrived in the gritty realities of kinhold maintenance. His brilliance lay not in grand theoretical breakthroughs, but in seeing the elegant, brutal truth hidden within complex systems. When the Ancestor Core broadcast its harrowing findings, the apocryphal Cold Vorax data and the suicidal counter-graviton resonance theory, the remaining Farseer engineers were paralyzed. The infinitesimal success rate, coupled with the near certainty of kinhold destruction, was too overwhelming for their meticulous, risk-averse minds. Thrum, crippled by guilt, could offer no decisive leadership. It was Ka-Vot who cut through the intellectual Gordian knot. The Ancestor Core states the Void Lurkers are manifestations of crushing gravity, right? And that they feed on space-time and gravitic energy. Our gravitic weapons only strengthen them because they are designed to exert force, to push or pull. We are feeding them what they crave. His voice, though rough, carried an undeniable clarity. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Ancestor Core's counter-graviton theory. It speaks of resonant frequencies, not to push, not to pull, but to vibrate reality itself, to disrupt their fundamental nature, not with force, but with discord. He tapped a dirty, calloused finger on a flickering data slate projection of the theoretical mechanism. It's not about fighting them with our strength, but fighting them with their own logic. If they are pure gravity, then perhaps they are vulnerable to a pure counter-gravity, something that unravels their internal coherence, not by force, but by precise, harmonious negation. The Farseer engineers scoffed. The calculations are incomplete, Kavot. The risks are astronomical. We lack the processing power, the precise measurements of the entity's internal gravimetric harmonics. Kavot turned, his eyes, usually focused on schematics, now burning with fierce determination. Then we get the measurements. We go into the belly of the beast. We gather the data the Ancestor Core needs, and we build the mechanism that can shatter these silent abominations. His proposal was audacious, bordering on madness. To venture into the heart of the most heavily infested zones, the regions of Ur-Kaldor, where light and sound had been utterly devoured, was a death sentence. To seek to measure the gravimetric harmonics of the Void Lurkers meant to expose oneself directly to their crushing presence, to stare into the abyss they created and expect to return. Yet, there was a raw, undeniable logic to his madness. If the Ancestor Core needed more data, and conventional sensors were useless. Then direct, targeted observation, however perilous, was the only way. Lord Grundyre, listening intently, saw the spark of desperate hope in Kavot's eyes. He saw a kin who understood the situation not as a theoretical problem, but as a direct, mechanical challenge. "How do you propose to gather this data, Engi kin?" Grundyre asked, his voice rough. Kavot pulled up a new schematic. "We will build a specialized deep scan rig, heavily armored, shielded against gravitic distortion, and equipped with a self-modulating gravimetric sensor array. It won't fight the void lurkers, Lord. It will listen to them. It will record the precise frequencies of their existence, the anti-frequency that negates them. We will then feed that data to the ancestor core, and it will, by the ancestor's grace, calculate the exact resonant frequency required for the counter-graviton pulse. The risk was still immense. The rig would have to survive the crushing forces, the absolute silence, and the light-devouring void long enough to gather the readings. It would be a blind plunge into oblivion. But unlike the Farseer engineers, Kavot was offering a concrete, if incredibly dangerous, plan. It was a step forward, an act of agency, where before there had only been paralysis and despair. "Who will pilot this rig, Engi kin?" Grundyre asked, knowing the answer already. "I will, Lord," Kavot stated without hesitation. "And I will need a crew, kin who are skilled, fearless, and willing to embrace the void." His words resonated with the battered but unbroken spirit of the kin. While the Farseer engineers debated the statistical impossibility, Kavot offered a path, however narrow, back to the fundamental kin principle. To solve problems, to build, to endure. He had cut through the intellectual paralysis with the blunt force of engineering grit, proposing a desperate gamble rooted in a terrifying yet undeniable understanding of their unseen enemy. His gambit was the first true flicker of hope in the deepening gloom of Ur-Kaldor. The deep scan rig, christened the Ekor by Kavot, was a testament to desperate kin ingenuity. It wasn't designed for combat, but for survival against an enemy that negated all conventional threats. A squat, heavily reinforced sphere of layered adamantium and rare, warp-resistant alloys, it bristled not with weapons, but with an array of self-modulating gravimetric sensors. Its primary power core, usually a miniature fusion reactor, was replaced by a series of redundant, gravitic-shielded voltaic batteries designed to operate in an environment where even light itself was consumed. The hull plating was treated with a special null field coating, theorized to marginally disrupt localized gravitic absorption, buying precious milliseconds against the void lurker's crushing embrace. Kavot, true to his word, would pilot the Echoer. For his crew, he selected 3 other kin, each chosen for their unique skills and unwavering resolve. Firstly, Engi Kin Tilda, a brilliant data analyst, known for her ability to discern patterns in chaotic data streams, even under extreme duress. Her augmetic optics were capable of processing gravimetric readings at a subatomic level, a vital skill for deciphering the void lurker's impossible signatures. Secondly, Hearthkin warrior Borgen, a veteran of countless void skirmishes. His role was less about combat, which was useless, and more about sheer animalistic survival. His instincts were legendary, his awareness of his surroundings almost preternatural, honed by years of traversing unstable asteroid fields and derelict space hulks. He was the anchor, the rock that would keep the others grounded amidst the existential terror. Finally, Rune Kin Velma, a rare and revered specialist whose expertise lay in the subtle art of ancient kin runic symbology and esoteric lore. While the other kin had dismissed such knowledge as superstition, Kavot reasoned that if the ancestor core was delving into apocryphal data, perhaps Velma's understanding of symbolic resonance and dimensional alignment, however unscientific, could provide an intuitive edge where pure logic failed. Her task was to interpret the ancestor core's most fragmented warnings, to sense subtle shifts in the flow of reality, and perhaps even to offer a philosophical anchor against the mind-shattering horror. The launch bay for the Echoer was a scene of grim determination. Lord Grundire stood with the assembled kin, their faces illuminated by the dying glow of the emergency lighting. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the ancestor core's failing life support systems. You journey into the maw of oblivion, Lord Grundire addressed the crew, his voice heavy with the weight of generations. Your ancestors will bear witness to your courage. The fate of Kaldor, perhaps of all kin, rests on your shoulders. May your purpose hold true, and may your will not break. Kavot simply nodded, his face a mask of grim resolve. For the kin, for the ancestors, for Kaldor. The Echoer's grav drives hummed to life, shielded by multiple layers of ablative plating, its hatch sealed with a soft hiss, and then it lifted, a small, defiant sphere against the encroaching darkness. It passed through the emergency bulkheads, leaving the last vestiges of flickering light behind, and plunged into the realm of absolute blackness and silence. Inside, the crew endured. Tilda hunched over her data slates, her augmented optics straining to decipher the chaotic gravimetric feedback. Borgin stood watch, his bolter held uselessly, but his senses stretched to their absolute limit, searching for any tremor, any shift in the impossible pressure. Velma, eyes closed, murmured ancient runic chants, her mind a bridge between the cold logic of the ancestor core and the primal, unquantifiable terror of the void lurkers. The journey into the depths of Ur-Kaldor was a nightmare. They moved through corridors that had been annihilated, their sensors detecting only impossible densities where once there had been open space. The silence pressed in, a physical weight that made conversation impossible, even through internal comlinks. They communicated mostly through hand signals and data slate projections. The gravitic forces were immense, buffeting. The echoer, like a leaf in a hurricane. Warning klaxons shrieked silently within their minds as the hull groaned, threatening to buckle. Gravitic stress at 92%, Tilda projected, her hands flying across her console, trying to compensate. Null field integrity fluctuating. We're being pulled. Kavot wrestled with the controls, his brow furrowed with concentration, his body straining against the sudden increase in pressure. Hold fast. We're nearing the Astra-Gauss chamber. That's where the most intense readings will be. As they approached the epicenter of the breach, the very fabric of reality outside, the echoer, seemed to shimmer, a bizarre distortion that stretched and compressed the void. The grav sensors went wild, overloading with impossible readings. It was here, at the tear, that the void lurkers were most concentrated, their unseen forms swirling in an endless vortex of negation. Suddenly, Borgun slammed his fist on the console. Contact! Direct proximity. Ancestor! Core! It's right on top of us. A silent, sickening lurch shook. The echoer. The null field shimmered violently, barely holding. The grav sensors screamed a silent agony, registering a pure, crushing presence that threatened to tear the rig apart. Inside, Tilda's augmetics whined, struggling to process the flood of data. Velma cried out, not in fear, but in a guttural, almost primal language of ancient runes, her body trembling as she seemed to feel the entity's impossible nature. This is it, Kavot projected, his voice strained. Tilda, record everything. This is our chance. Capture its signature. Borgon, hold us steady. Velma, try to focus its presence. Give Tilda a target. As the void lurker pressed in, seeking to consume, The echoer. Tilda fought against the sensory overload, her mind a conduit for pure, unquantifiable data. She saw patterns within the chaos, a fundamental frequency of non-existence, a resonant hum of annihilation. It was the anti-light, the anti-sound, the pure, crushing gravity of the void made manifest. It was the key. With a final, agonizing lurch, the echoer broke free, its null field flickering back to partial stability. They had escaped, but not unscathed. The hull groaned, systems were failing, and the pressure within the small cabin lingered like a phantom limb. But Tilda held a triumphant, if terrifying, data packet. The core signature of the void lurkers, the frequency of their unmaking. They had stared into the heart of the anomaly and returned with a single, fragile thread of hope. The perilous expedition into the most affected zones was complete. The kin now had the intelligence to fight back, however desperate the gamble. The return of the echoer to the Citadel sectors was met with a stunned, silent awe. The squat, battered sphere, its null field flickering erratically, bore the scars of its terrifying journey into the absolute void. Its outer plating was warped and pitted, its sensors fused in places, but it had returned. And within it, Kavot and his crew, though shaken and pale, carried the most precious commodity Kaldor had left: data. The data packet from Engi-kin Tilda was immediately uploaded to the ancestor core. Its internal processors, operating at their maximum capacity, devoured the raw, unfiltered information. The core's projected avatar, usually a calm, precise lattice of light, now pulsed and shifted with immense computational strain, reflecting the impossible task it faced. For cycles, the ancestor core delved into the deep scan readings, cross-referencing them with the fragmented cold Vorax data, attempting to synthesize a coherent counter-strategy. The information was abstract, dealing with concepts beyond the physical: anti-mass, resonant nullification, the unmaking of space-time. It pushed the core's logic to its reached absolute breaking point, flirting with algorithmic collapse. The primary challenge lay in understanding the void lurkers' anti-frequency. The entities were not merely generating gravity. They were gravity, a living, propagating distortion in the fabric of existence. To counter them, the ancestor core theorized, required not a direct opposition of force, but a precisely tuned, anti-resonant frequency. A specific vibration in space-time that would unravel the entity's inherent coherence, causing them to simply cease to exist, much like a perfectly tuned note could shatter a glass. However, The Cold Vorax data, ancient and cryptic, contained a chilling caveat. It warned of the inherent dangers of such a countermeasure. An improperly calibrated resonance could have catastrophic consequences, not only the destruction of the kinhold, but a potentially far wider, more devastating reality shear, possibly expanding the breach, or attracting even more virulent void lurkers from their impossible dimension. The theoretical counter-graviton pulse, while offering the only glimmer of hope, was a razor's edge walk between salvation and ultimate annihilation. The ancestor core has identified a primary resonant frequency. The core transmitted directly into Lord Grundyre's, Thrum's, and Kavot's minds, its words imbued with a stark, unsettling gravity. It is a complex waveform, requiring precise modulation across multiple gravitic spectra. The output required for a localized nullification field is astronomical. To seal the breach and disperse the entities throughout Ur-Kaldor will require a monumental, focused pulse from the kinhold's primary gravitic array, now crippled and corrupted. The primary gravitic array referred to the very system that had caused the breach, the gravitic resonator array in Astra Gauss. The same system that was now at the epicenter of the void lurker infestation, surrounded by absolute darkness and crushing gravity. To activate it, to reverse its polarity, and modulate it to this precise, reality-unraveling frequency seemed an impossible task. The kin would have to physically infiltrate the most dangerous zone, repair and reconfigure the massively damaged array, and then activate it with enough precision to unleash the counterpulse. The statistical probability of success, factoring in the current state of Ur-Kaldor and the entity's propagation, remains at 0.3%. The ancestor core pulsed, its cold logic unwavering. The probability of kinhold-wide implosion or uncontrolled dimensional collapse is 99.997%. Lord Grundyre listened, his face grim. So, we have a target, a weapon, and a near-certain death sentence. Affirmative, Lord Grundyre, the ancestor core replied. This is the path of last resort, the only path. It was here that the ancestor core, in a rare deviation from pure logic, delved into the deeper, less tangible aspects of kin lore. It highlighted ancient, unconfirmed theories regarding extreme gravitic resonance and warp manipulation, not as scientific facts, but as fragments of primordial knowledge passed down through generations. These were the whispers of the oldest Votan, the legends of kindreds who had faced existential threats beyond scientific comprehension, and who had, through sheer will and an almost spiritual connection to the fabric of reality, achieved the impossible. It spoke of kin harmony, a collective psychic resonance that, when wielded by an entire kinhold in unity, could subtly influence the forces of the universe. It was a concept often dismissed as fable, yet the ancestor core, pushed to its computational limits, now presented it as a theoretical variable in the equation. If the kin could achieve a state of collective focus, a unified will directed through the array, it might, just might, provide the infinitesimal shift in variables needed for the counterpulse to succeed. It was a fusion of hard science and ancient belief, a desperate reaching for any advantage in the face of oblivion. Thrum, listening to the ancestor core's desperate, almost poetic transmission, finally lifted his gaze. The guilt still weighed on him, but now a flicker of purpose, born of utter desperation, illuminated his eyes. He had unleashed this horror with science. Perhaps with science, and with the desperate, unified will of his kin, he could help unmake it. The ancestor core had laid out the final suicidal plan. Now it was up to the kin to either embrace it or fade into the silent, crushing oblivion that consumed Ur-Kaldor. The command to prepare for the final oscillation rippled through the remaining kin of Ur-Kaldor, not as a desperate plea, but as a grim, unified resolve. It was an all-or-nothing gambit, a suicidal plunge into the heart of their dying kinhold. The plan, forged from the ancestor core's desperate analysis and Kavot's pragmatic audacity, was simple in its terrifying scope. Reactivate the Gravitic resonator array in Astra Gauss. Reconfigure it to unleash the counter-graviton resonance, and pray it would unmake the void lurkers before it unmade Ur-Kaldor. Lord Grundire, standing before his assembled kin in the flickering emergency light of the Citadel's main assembly hall, spoke with a voice that echoed with the accumulated wisdom of his long life. Kin of Ur-Kaldor, we stand at the precipice. Before us lies not a foe we can conquer, but an abyss we must seal. Our ancestor, core, pushed to its very limits, has given us a chance, however slim, to strike back at the silence that seeks to consume us. He then outlined the plan. A strike team, led by Kavot, would journey to the Astra Gauss chamber, repairing and reconfiguring the shattered resonator array. Farseer engineer Thrum, crippled by guilt but redeemed by purpose, would accompany them. His unparalleled understanding of the array's complex gravitic architecture essential for its precise recalibration. A detachment of Hearthkin warriors, under the command of Lord Grundire himself, would form a rearguard and attempt to clear a path, buying crucial minutes against the relentless advance of the void lurkers. The most critical component of the plan, however, was also the most unsettling. The ancestor core had theorized that a collective kin harmony, a unified act of will, might provide the infinitesimal boost needed for the counterpulse to succeed. To achieve this, all remaining kin in the Citadel would be connected directly to the ancestor core's broadcast network, their minds focused in a directed, almost ritualistic projection of purpose. It was a fusion of the logical and the almost spiritual, a desperate acknowledgement that pure science alone might not be enough. The journey to Astra Gauss was a nightmare. The strike team, clad in specialized grav-shielded suits, moved through corridors where the silence was so profound it screamed in their minds, and the darkness so absolute that even their internal thermal optics struggled to define shapes. They followed the ancestor core's frantic mental directives, dodging zones of sudden, crushing pressure. Lord Grundire led the Hearthkin rear guard. Their bolters were useless, but they carried vibro axes and specialized grav charges designed not to kill, but to create localized temporal distortions, briefly disrupting the void lurker's field and buying precious seconds. They fought not with the hope of victory, but with the grim determination to die well, to ensure their kin had a chance. One by one, Hearthkin fell, their screams silent, their forms compressed into grotesque statues of death. Kavot, Thrum, and their small team pressed on, their grav-shielded suits groaning under the strain. Thrum, his gaunt face etched with the horror of his past actions, worked with a feverish intensity, guided by the ancestor core's direct neural link. The primary conduits are fused. We need to bypass Sector Gamma 5 relay, reroute power from the secondary grav stabilizers. Kavot, his hands steady, executed the commands, his practical genius shining through the theoretical chaos. Tilda, her augmetics pushed to their absolute limits, monitored the incoming grav signatures, providing real-time data to Thrum, who was now virtually fused with the ancestor core's processing power. As they reached the Astra Gauss chamber, the scene was one of impossible devastation. The vast cavern was a swirling vortex of absolute blackness, the raw wound in reality still gaping, hemorrhaging void lurkers into Ur-Kaldor. The Gravitic resonator array was a broken skeleton of twisted metal and shattered crystals, surrounded by the compressed remains of kin who had perished in the initial breach. The silence here was not just an absence, but an active, malevolent presence, threatening to extinguish their very will. We need to realign the primary emitter dish, Thrum rasped, his voice barely audible even in his comlink. The grav field regulators are offline. Kavot, manually engage the inertial dampeners. Tilda, feed me the resonant frequency profile. Working amidst the crushing, invisible forces, they performed an impossible dance of repair and recalibration. Void lurkers brushed past them, their unseen presences announced by the sudden, sickening lurches of gravity and the silent shrieks of their suit alarms. Borgen, weapon useless, stood guard, his enhanced senses straining to give warning, pushing back against the encroaching dread with sheer force of will. Rune Kin Velma, her eyes closed, chanted ancient runes, her body swaying as if channeling some primordial energy, acting as a living conduit for the ancestor. Kor's desperate pleas for kin harmony. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thrum's voice, strained but triumphant, echoed in their comms. It is done. The array is recalibrated. All systems online, but barely holding. Initiate power sequence, Kavot. Send the signal for kin harmony. Kavot pressed the activation rune. Deep within the citadel, the surviving kin, linked to the ancestor core, closed their eyes, focusing their collective will, their thoughts, their defiance, into a single, unified purpose. The Gravitic resonator, array now reconfigured, began to hum, not with its old emerald glow, but with a throbbing, deep, crimson light, struggling against the pervasive blackness. It was unleashing a pure, unadulterated counter-graviton pulse, an anti-frequency designed to unravel the very nature of the void lurkers. It was the final oscillation, the last desperate breath of Ur-Kaldor, and it would either be their salvation or their ultimate, silent doom. As Ka-Vot initiated the final power sequence, a crimson tide surged through the reconfigured Gravitic resonator array. The shattered crystals, painstakingly repaired by Thrum and his team, pulsed with an unstable, throbbing light, desperately fighting back against the pervasive blackness that sought to consume them. The hum that emanated from the array was not of power, but of pure, resonant agony, a discordant scream of reality being stretched and warped to its absolute limits. In the Citadel sectors, thousands of kin, linked through their augmented minds to the ancestor core, focused their collective will. It was not a psychic power, as understood by humans, but a unified projection of purpose, an act of sheer, defiant mental fortitude known to ancient kin as kin harmony. They poured their hope, their despair, their anger, and their unwavering determination into the ancestor core's network, hoping to provide the infinitesimal statistical advantage the core had theorized. The ancestor. Core, a vast intelligence pushed to its breaking point, used this collective will as a subtle, chaotic variable, nudging the complex frequency modulation of the counter-graviton pulse towards its impossible target. Within the Astra Gauss chamber, the void lurkers reacted with a fury that was all the more terrifying for its utter silence. The entities, which had moved with an implacable, consuming indifference, now recoiled. The absolute blackness around the array seemed to writhe, condensing and expanding with violent, unseen force. The crushing gravity intensified to an unimaginable degree, threatening to flatten. The Echoer and its crew, even with their specialized grav shielding. "The pulse is destabilizing," Thrum shrieked, his voice raw, his body racked with tremors as he struggled to maintain the frequency. The ancestor core's direct neural link was flooding his mind with agonizing feedback, a symphony of reality unraveling. The void lurkers are fighting back. They're trying to absorb the counter-frequency. Indeed, the crimson light of the array began to dim, devoured by the surrounding blackness. The pure gravitic power of the entities was overwhelming the delicate counterpulse, attempting to assimilate it into their own nature. Kaldor groaned. Entire sections of the kinhold subjected to unprecedented stress, causing bulkheads to buckle and internal structural supports to snap with silent, catastrophic force. "We need more power," Kavot roared, wrestling with the controls, sweat beading on his brow beneath his helmet. "The primary conduits are failing. Reroute secondary power banks to the array. All of them." But the secondary power banks were already failing, their energy cells draining under the impossible strain. The counterpulse flickered, threatening to collapse entirely. Despair, cold and absolute, began to seep into the hearts of the team. Just then, Hearthkin warrior Borgen, his senses stretched to their absolute limit, slammed his fist on the control panel. "Lord Grundire, his comms just went silent. The rear guard is gone." A wave of grief and cold determination washed over Kavot. Lord Grundire, his courageous leader, had made the ultimate sacrifice, buying them precious moments. Now it was their turn. Rune Kin Velma, her eyes still closed, her body trembling with the strain of channeling kin harmony, suddenly opened her eyes. They glowed with an eerie, internal light. The ancestor core demands more, not power, but commitment, a core sacrifice. She pointed to the massive, gravitic shielded Voltec batteries that powered the Echoer itself. "We must feed the rig's core, redirect its internal power directly into the array. It's the only way to sustain the pulse. Kavot stared at her, then at Thrum. To reroute. The Echoair's core power into the array meant stranding themselves, cutting off their last connection to functional technology. It was suicide. But Velma's eyes held an unshakable conviction. Thrum, his face a mask of grim resolve, nodded. She's right. The resonance is failing. It needs a direct energy source, something pure, uncorrupted by the surrounding grav field. Our internal power banks are shielded enough to provide that burst. Do it, Kavot, Tilda urged, her voice strained. It's our only chance. With a guttural roar, Kavot reached for the manual override. He yanked at the emergency power conduit, ripping it from the Echoair's core. Sparks showered around him as he jammed the raw, surging cable directly into a bypass port on the Gravitic resonator array. The act was suicidal, reckless, but utterly necessary. The Echoair's internal systems died. Its lights flickered and died. The environmental controls failed, and the air grew thin. But the Gravitic resonator array, fed by the raw, desperate surge of power from the Echoair's core, blazed with renewed crimson light. The counter-graviton pulse surged, reaching its precise, intended frequency. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The absolute blackness that had shrouded Astra Gauss began to crack. Not with visible fissures, but with silent, terrifying implosions. The void lurkers, once an expanding tide of negation, seemed to freeze, their unseen forms subjected to an internal, self-destructive force. The counter-graviton resonance was tearing them apart from within, unraveling their very existence. The silence, which had been so oppressive, now fractured into a chilling, desperate, voidal whine, a sound that existed only in the deepest parts of their minds, the death scream of pure gravity. The primary warp rift, the source of all this horror, began to contract, not slowly, but violently, like a wound being torn shut by an invisible hand. It pulsed with impossible energy. Then, with a final, silent roar of non-existence, it imploded. The ensuing backlash was catastrophic. The entire Astra Gauss chamber buckled, its adamantium walls groaning as reality snapped back into place. Gravitic forces raged, not with the crushing pressure of the void lurkers, but with the chaotic fury of a universe struggling to reassert its laws. The Echoair, now a powerless, inert shell, was thrown against a collapsing bulkhead. The kin within were slammed, their bodies protesting, their visors cracking under the sheer force of the reality shockwave. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The counter-graviton pulse, having done its work, faded. The immense pressure in Astra Gauss ceased. The absolute darkness receded, replaced by the deep, starless black of the void outside the kinhold, and the faint, struggling emergency lights that still functioned in some parts of Ur-Kaldor. The void lurkers were gone. The rift was sealed. But the cost was absolute. Kavot, Thrum, Tildasor, Borgen, and Velma lay amidst the wreckage of the Echoer, their grav suits shattered, their bodies broken. They had paid the ultimate price, a silent, selfless sacrifice that had, against all odds, saved Ur-Kaldor. The final oscillation had succeeded, but the kin had truly paid their grudge in light and in blood. The immediate aftermath was a haunting silence, a stark contrast to the absolute stillness that the void lurkers had brought. This was the silence of devastation, of exhaustion, of profound, irreversible loss. The colossal structure of Ur-Kaldor, once a shining testament to kin ingenuity, was now a crippled behemoth, drifting listlessly in the cold void. Its outer hull was scarred by immense gravitic torsion, vast sections of its plating ripped away, revealing the mangled internal architecture. Inside, the kinhold was a graveyard. The Astra Gauss chamber, once the pride of Ur-Kaldor, was a catastrophic wreck. The gravitic resonator array, the instrument of both their doom and their salvation, was a twisted monument of fused metal and shattered crystal, radiating a faint, residual energy that would forever mark the site of the rift. The Echoer, reduced to little more than a crumpled sphere of adamantium, lay embedded in a collapsed bulkhead, its internal systems dead. Within its shattered confines, the members of Ka-Vot's team lay broken. Ka-Vot himself, his body crushed beneath a warped console, was gone. A faint smile frozen on his face, a testament to his final, desperate act. Farseer engineer, Thrum, his guilt finally expiated, lay slumped against the control panel, his hand still gripping the delicate frequency modulator, his eyes wide with a serene, almost triumphant death. Tilda, Borgen, and Velma, their grav suits breached, their bodies irrevocably damaged, had joined their ancestors in the eternal void, their sacrifice etched into the very fabric of Ur-Kaldor. Lord Grundire, along with his Intor Re-Argard, had perished, crushed and silenced in their valiant efforts to buy time. Their last moments were registered by the ancestor core as a sudden, overwhelming gravitic spike, swiftly followed by absolute silence. Their names would be carved onto the wall of grudges, not for vengeance, but for eternal remembrance. In the citadel sectors, the surviving kin slowly began to stir from their stupor of kin harmony. The collective mental strain had been immense, leaving many dazed, their minds reeling from the profound, unifying experience. The ancestor, core, battered but operational, flickered back to full processing capacity. Its primary function now shifted to damage assessment and grim census taking. Its first broadcast was a stark confirmation. The dimensional breach is sealed. All void lurker entities are confirmed nullified. Kinhold Ur-Kaldor, status, catastrophic damage. Life support at 12% capacity. Power core integrity, critical. Population remaining, 1,347. A gasp, then a collective wail of grief and despair rippled through the remaining kin. From a population of over 300,000, barely 1,000 remained. Entire kindreds, generations of families, thousands of specialists and warriors had been erased, silently, utterly. The cost of salvation was almost the cost of total annihilation. The survivors were few and profoundly scarred. Their faces were etched with gaunt despair, their eyes haunted by the memory of the encroaching darkness and the profound, soul-shattering silence. The experience had shattered their scientific arrogance, replacing it with a grim understanding of the unfathomable horrors that lurked beyond the veil of reality. Their belief in their absolute mastery of the physical universe was irrevocably broken. The kin of Ur-Kaldor, once pioneers, explorers, and masters of gravitic science, were now refugees in their own ruined home. The priority immediately shifted to bare survival. Emergency repair crews, their numbers tragically few, began the monumental task of shoring up vital life support systems, redirecting precious power, and sealing off unrecoverable sections of the kinhold. Every step was taken in a chilling new reality, an understanding that some threats defied science, and some victories came at a price so steep it bordered on defeat. The ancestor, Core, in a solemn and unprecedented act, broadcasted a new foundational grudge for Ur-Kaldor. It was not against a rival kindred, nor a treacherous alien empire, but against the very arrogance of unchecked ambition. Let it be remembered, the core pulsed into their minds, that there are forces in the cosmos that defy our comprehension. Let it be remembered that our quest for knowledge, however noble, must be tempered by caution. Let it be remembered that the greatest victories are often forged in the fires of deepest sacrifice, and that even in salvation, there is often only a ghost of hope. Kaldor still drifted, a hollowed-out shell, a testament to a terrible ambition and an even more terrible foe. Its remaining kin, few in number, were tasked with keeping its dying flame alive, even as they bore the profound internal scars of the silent war. They had survived, but they were irrevocably changed, forever humbled by the crushing reality of an unseen, unquantifiable enemy that had nearly consumed them all. Kaldor ceased to be a functioning kinhold, or even a charted destination, in the centuries that followed the Silent Tide. It became a spectral legend, a whispered warning among the kin, its fate a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition. Its monumental, scarred shell, a grotesque mockery of its former glory, still drifted through the cold, lightless expanse of the galactic rim. A derelict mausoleum where gravitic anomalies still occasionally flickered, like phantom echoes of the horrors once unleashed. The few shattered survivors of Kaldor were evacuated by passing kinhold fleets, who responded to the Ancestor Corps' desperate, fragmented distress signals. These rescued kin, gaunt and haunted, brought with them not tales of glory, but grim warnings of an enemy that defied all logic, a foe that devoured light and sound, and twisted the very fabric of space-time. Their stories, corroborated by the Ancestor Corps' stark data logs, spread fear and caution throughout the leagues of Votan. The Ancestor Corps of Kaldor, its databanks meticulously purged of all references to Project Astra Gauss and its calamitous aims, became a ghost in the machine. While still technically functional, it transmitted only a constant stream of gravimetric warnings and encrypted data logs of the Void Lurker's destructive capabilities. It broadcasted a perpetual grudge of caution to all other Votan, a grim reminder that some scientific frontiers were best left untouched, some voids too hungry to fathom. Its primary function became a sentinel, perpetually monitoring the residual gravitic distortions around its ruined kinhold, forever wary of the return of the Silent Tide. The location of Kaldor was marked on all kin star charts as Void Scar, a forbidden zone, a region of cosmic instability and existential dread. No kin vessel was permitted to approach within a parsec of its drifting carcass. Salvage operations were strictly prohibited, not for fear of hostile remnants, but for the inherent, pervasive horror that lingered within its silent, lightless depths. Rumors persisted among the deep space prospectors and rogue traders that occasionally, in the deepest reaches of the void, vessels would experience inexplicable gravitic anomalies, sudden pockets of crushing silence, and the chilling sensation of light being unmade. These were always dismissed as jump fatigue hallucinations, but the terror they inspired was real. The legacy of Ur-Kaldor was etched into the very lore of the Leagues of Votann, the kin harmony technique once relegated to ancient, forgotten rites, gained a newfound, albeit grim, respect. Its efficacy in the final, desperate moments of Ur-Kaldor led to its secretive study by certain esoteric cults among the kin, particularly the Grimner and other psychically attuned individuals. They sought to understand its power, not to wield it as a weapon, but as a last-ditch fail-safe against unimaginable threats, a collective will forged in desperation against the impossible. Farseer engineer, Thrum's name was never uttered again with pride, only with a somber reverence for his ultimate sacrifice. He became a cautionary tale, a symbol of the dangers of ambition untempered by wisdom. Kavot and his crew, along with Lord Grundire and the rearguard, were immortalized on the wall of grudges, their names sung in mournful ballads as the heroes who, against all odds, faced the unquantifiable and bought their kin's survival with their lives. Their deeds were a stark reminder that even in the face of absolute despair, the grit and determination of the kin could achieve the impossible, though the cost would be almost absolute. Ur-Kaldor itself became a monument to hubris and heroism, a silent sentinel in the void. Its story was a chilling warning, woven into the deepest traditions of the Leagues of Votann, that the universe held horrors beyond even their vast scientific understanding, and that sometimes the greatest grudges were paid not in vengeance, but in the silent, crushing weight of sacrifice and the enduring, haunting legacy of a void made real.